Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick with Camp Notes for 8/5/23, the Saturday practice here. Long practice, a hot practice, and a awfully unproductive practice for the offense, which had a really lousy day against the defense. I guess you could think of it as the defense had a very good day. They picked off a total of 9 passes, which is absolutely unheard of in terms of a single practice and that many uh, passes going wrong. A lot of underthrown balls in 11 on 11, and just balls that the cornerbacks got to, balls that the safeties got to, and I'm going to go into each one specifically as we go through. But there's not going to be a lot of positive things to say about the offense. So if you wanted a lot of OBJ notes, you're not going to get those today. And I also watched the defense in the individual drills and have some notes on that, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Practice itself, though, not quite as hot as it had been last week. 85 degrees today. In terms of participation, Ronnie Stanley had what we believe was a vet day. We did not hear from Harbaugh at the podium today. He actually, I believe, begged out at some point because he was on the schedule, but we ended up with the tight ends coach and Kolar and Likely being the three who ended up talking at the podium. I'll talk a little bit about what they said later. In terms of other participation, you may have heard Trayvon Mullen cut for a second time. He's on some sort of reserve NFI list right now, which means his status is not quite determined yet. Probably a matter of money at this point and how they're going to settle the situation. But Trayvon, he was on the roster on PUP, got cut actually on the NFI list, I believe. Then he got cut. Then he got re-signed, and then we believe that was to have his contract non-guaranteed, and then he just got cut again. So it's hard to really say what's going on, other than there was the Ravens claim anyway. There was a non-reporting of an injury, so that was at the heart of some of this. In terms of the PUP players, we still have Dobbins, Ricard, and Bateman on that list. One of the things that's been getting Harbaugh kind of upset in terms of the questions has been questions about J.K. Dobbins and when's he coming back. He doesn't know. In terms of Bateman, he didn't want to give a timetable. I don't think we've heard anything yet about Ricard and the status of his injury and when he's likely to be back. So those guys are still on PUP. In terms of NFI, in addition to Mullen, we still have Voorhees, who presumably will stay there for the whole season. But I am hearing, and this is from cap expert Brian McFarland, that there's a chance that the Ravens really would like to pay Voorhees at the split rate, which means instead of a $750,000 or so rookie salary, he'd make something like $430,000 instead. The Ravens also would lose the extra year of an RFA possibility that would occur after the first 4 years after his draft. So that would be for the 2027 season. They potentially would lose the services of Voorhees to free agency. And it's a play nice with your draftees move if they do it. But it is still, I guess, possible that they keep him on NFI the entire time. But that would be really playing hardball if they did. Beyond Voorhees, Bowser and Moore, the long snapper, are both on NFI as well. So none of those statuses have changed, and I don't know that we'll have word on when they will. Mullen and Moore are both expected to miss the season. Voorhees is, of course, as well, and Bowser is the one who I think there's still hope that he'll be back. What Harbaugh said the last time he had addressed the Bowser issue was that there were reasonable timelines related to it. So it seemed to be they have some idea of when he'll be back. That could be midseason. It could be some. I think it probably means he will not miss the full season, is how I would interpret that comment from Harbaugh, and that's a damn good thing because Bowser obviously a very important player. Missing this practice only, and for as far as we know, are not long-term injury. Trenton Simpson still out. David Ajabo missed yet another day. Rock Ya-Sin, who apparently came back with a clean MRI, even though there's some pain in the knee from his injury the other day. It missed another day. Stone missed another day, and Arthur Mollett, we didn't get an update on what his situation was, so hopefully it's not anything serious. But he just had a pretty big day the last time I was there on the 2nd. So that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on. I think that's it. I think I've covered the other things about Harbaugh missing his podium appearance, so we'll move on to the offense. I just got to say it was an awful day. 7 on 7, 11 on 11, included 9 interceptions, 4 of those by Lamar Jackson, 3 by Josh Johnson, and 2 by Huntley. Anthony Brown didn't have any interceptions, but he didn't have very many passes either. So not an impressive day really by any quarterback. I'd say the good looks from the offense, the balls that got out cleanly and whatnot, came mostly in the 11 versus 0 drills. They actually are 11 versus colors. There's 2 defensive linemen that are dressed in blue, I believe it is, 5 defensive backs dressed in red, and 2 inside linebackers dressed in green. So it's 4, 2, and 5 in those colors that are on the field, but they're just non-athletic looking assistants who take those roles and have papers in their hand telling them how they should play defense against an offense that really honestly could just flip the ball over their head anytime they felt like it. So it's not a competitive drill by any sense. If you think back to the Joe Flacco era, there was a time when Joe used to actually get upset at the defense because they would be so disruptive and the practices were so competitive because of the scoring system that they would make it very difficult for Flacco to just run the offense and try and, get some legitimate live fire practice against players who weren't trying to intercept every pass or disrupt every play or could recognize their playbook and all the other things that your own team can sometimes do to you. And obviously a very talented defense can do to you even more often. So Joe would complain about that, we know you're good. Just let us run our offense, damn it. And that's kind of, I think, how Lamar must have been feeling by the end of this day. Very difficult day for all of them. A point was made that a drill they ran for at least one session was 3rd and long, but I don't think they were running 3rd and long the whole day. At least I don't know if they were. So it's the kind of thing where you really wonder it could have been, might have been situational in terms of, the pass rushers put in a better position and all the things that happen on 3rd and long that make a defense more effective. But I think there were other elements to that too, that the offense just really had a truly lousy day. But rather than focus on them, we'll go over the defense for a moment, talk a little bit about the drills they went through, because that's what I watched today. Then we'll move back over to talk about 11 and 11s and just what the hell happened on all those interceptions. So start off with the defensive line drills. The defensive line and the outside linebackers were mixed for this. And the interesting thing about it was Chuck Smith was teaching both groups. So it could have been Anthony Weaver, who's a defensive line coach, and he was there for a part of it he's there for all of it, but he was there leading a part of it in terms of one-on-one reps that I want to talk about. But Chuck Smith, very easy to see how he'd be very helpful to outside linebackers or any pass rushers trying to improve their game. So he has some specific drills he takes them through. I'll talk a little bit about those. Has some very technical and specific advice. I won't talk about any of that I overheard, but from the nature of what he's telling individual players, they're getting specific items that are actionable, not general things they should do, which is very important. So I think that was a positive draw from this. The generalized focus of all of the drills is really on hand play and arm play. How do you get around the man across you, defeat his arms, use your arms effectively as weapons, as tools to throw off their opponent, but to your ultimate goal being get past that guy across from you in various ways. And so that's what we're going to focus on here. So they worked on rip moves for a while, very standard part. You see that in any camp. They often do these rip drills coming right off a blocking dummy, is how I've seen it often done in the past. These rip drills were done usually against the pads worn by Chuck Smith on a play. So he'll put on those long arm pads and they'll have to rip past him on those kind of moves. I'll talk a little bit about another set before. It was another person who was actually handling the pads on one because Justin Madubuike got a low 5 from Chuck Smith after one rep. It's very clear that Smith is very happy with Madubuike and who he has improved to as a pass rusher. That carries some very positive portent for this Ravens team. And I hope that they can keep Madubuike fresh as a pass rusher, given the increased snap burden we're likely to see coming from multiple angles this year. One, the loss of Calais Campbell, and of course, also the increase in total defensive snaps we expect to see from having Monken's offense, which is going to be, we assume, run at a faster pace than Roman's was, which was very much we're going to take our sweet time getting down the field, and you guys can just wait to get the football back again. And that led to a lot of tremendous per drive efficiency in terms of points. And the other side of that, if you want to go for more big plays, you might even do better in terms of points per drive, but you're definitely going to give up more drives. So essentially, it becomes a bigger pot. You're playing a less controlled size of pot when you do that. Think about it from a poker term, as I often do. Did a whole bunch of drills on how to beat offensive line punch. So those are basically done with the longer arm pads. So Chuck did some of that directly himself, and he's kind of poking at him as a lineman might, to kind of throw a defender off their game. And it seemed to me like he was using a variety of techniques. It wasn't just always, going high on the outside shoulder of the man opposite you. So, you could beat a typical outside move, or inside for that matter. He was mixing it up a little bit in terms of how he was, applying these punches. And we really want to see how did individuals react to that when they're not sure what was coming. So that was interesting to watch. It was really interesting to see Chuck Smith work his magic on a bunch of guys who we hope can become better individual pass rushers. I'll say the one guy who looked still a little hesitant, and they do a lot of work in terms of getting out of their stance quickly. A lot of it is not what I would call portable to the real game, to the real field. So they're working with a football that's on a stick, and they kind of pull it back, and they kind of all move at the same time. And a player on the field with an offensive lineman opposite him has a lot more to worry about. And in particular, he has to worry about, how am I making my first move, and does it need to change when I see the lineman do something different, like slide instead of just take his normal set? I think that the guy who did not look great there was Owe. He still looks a little hesitant with that first move out of his stance. I'm very bullish on who Adafe is going to become this year, particularly working with Chuck Smith. But this was a day where he didn't look that great getting out of his stance and making that first move from what I was seeing. And again, that first move he'd be making, it's all hand play stuff where he'd be hand playing against air. So I want to see that be a little bit better. Anthony Weaver took over versus the current defensive lineman. Now let's set the stage a little bit here. Anthony Weaver, of course, defensive line coach, ex-defensive lineman for the Ravens, who very durable during his time with the Ravens, had a great 5-year run with them from 2002 to 2006. Terrific lineman. But he is now probably around 42 years old, 41 years old, somewhere in that range. He is in magnificent shape. It looks like he could still play. He's a very large man. He, is the right shape top to bottom to be a defensive lineman. Still, he looks like he's not overweight. He looks like a powerful 5 tech, more like maybe a Madubuike, who is more of that body type, even though not a 5 tech. He's in outstanding physical shape. Here's what was impressive about what Anthony Weaver did there. He's going in there in basically what's a hand placement drill for the offensive lineman. So he's playing the offensive lineman against each of these defensive linemen. And he goes in, he sets up against each one individually. And then they execute these, what look like powerful young man rip moves in either direction on Anthony Weaver to try and get free. If you're a 42-year-old man and you're constantly getting effectively beat up with these rip moves, I think at the very least you get very bruised from that kind of a effort. So impressive that he's still able to do that. He doesn't show any difficulty in doing it. Maybe they're taking it a little bit easy on him, but it certainly looks like there's real physical contact there in terms of those rip moves. And it looks like, a good learning experience for them to have a guy like Weaver who's not afraid to mix it up with them, not afraid at all, to be a guy they need to get past in terms of those drills. So they did a left, they ripped left, they ripped right. So, including all the guys they have, outside linebackers and defensive linemen who are there, maybe a dozen players in total. That's 24 times he has to get hit in one arm or the other. And that'd be a lot to go through even in a single day. And I can't imagine going through it, 3 times in a given camp to do this drill. So impressive that he's a good coach anyway. And I mentioned how impressed by I was at the podium the last time he was up there. That interesting drill on lateral pursuit. So this involved showing the snap to 2 linemen and then having them immediately go after a ball carrier when the ball was, in theory, out quickly on a screen pass to the left side. Okay, that's the offensive left side. Not that it matters because they could have done it either way. And effectively, you just get to see how quickly these defensive linemen can respond. Are they quick enough to really add to pursuit? Got to hustle. The coach who's making the play is hustling. So there's just a component of that involved in it. And I think what you find on a lot of those plays is it's very hard for a defensive lineman to make a play in lateral pursuit unless the ball carrier is redirected or slowed down in some manner. But when that happens, there is a great opportunity for a forced fumble from that defensive lineman, particularly if they're coming in from the blind side of the player. If they're coming in, behind in the middle of the field, that's just a fumble waiting to happen. You're going to have a very powerful man using his club, maybe underhanded, maybe overhanded to try and get that ball loose, but he's going to be very effective at doing it. And we've seen that happen, certainly a fair amount. But even coming in from the side, if that ball carrier is not careful and he's, watching the defender in front of him, trying to figure out how can I make a few more yards off that one block, that's when fumbles happen. The other time fumbles happen, by the way, when you get somebody flipped up in the air. It's why I hate the hurdles so much you see from tight ends these days, is when they're up in the air, they're extremely vulnerable to losing the football, having it knocked free. So as much as, you kind of like the extra couple of yards they may get on those plays, and sometimes you get a breakaway out of it that even gives them more than that, the additional fumble risk to me is not worth it. And if you go look at the times that Todd Heap, for example, fumbled in his career, a whole lot of them were when he's up in the air off the ground and the ball then comes out. And just the whole nature of having to protect yourself from the fall and whatnot makes you a bigger fumble risk. So I think that DL lateral pursuit drill that I just mentioned has some real value to those guys to make sure they're out quickly, they're not giving up on plays, and that's obviously something that work, and they probably beat them over if they don't do a particularly great job. So a lot of the standard kind of QB rush drills, and everyone does them, so I'm not giving away anything, but move right of the dummy, move left of the dummy, then knock down the quarterback. This is where you get some interesting additional advice coming from Chuck Smith. He says, don't break your feet down. So he's saying that to everyone. That was a general comment. And I mentioned there's a specific and technical component to what he does. I think there is, but this is more of a thing he wants to remind everybody not to do, is don't let your feet get tied up by the fact that you have to slap this dummy in a certain way. You need to maintain your leverage appropriately while you deliver those hits to the dummy, and get around their faux pass protection that they are offering. So anyway, it's an interesting drill to watch, and I've always had a lot of fun watching all these DL drills. Defensive backs working out on the same side of the field. They did some interesting drills trying to, work off how to deal with bunch and pair formation, twin formations. And these occur. We see them a lot from the Steelers, a lot from the Chiefs. Are formations where you have the 2 receivers together where they can immediately pick off, one can pick off the other, or you have 3 together. That's called a bunch. You can't have even 4 together. I call that a diamond. I don't know if there's another word for it, if it's just a bunch of 4 or whatever, they may call it, but 2, 3, and 4 are all possible, is the point I'm making. And coverage responsibilities get specific, and they get specific off the move in those situations. So watching that happen, drill was done at about a quarter speed. The defensive backs are acting as the receivers in that particular case as well, and they have to know where their assignment is coming off that kind of a stack or a bunch or a twin or even a diamond formation. 2 and 3 was what they seemed to be doing today, and it seemed to be fairly second nature. I didn't hear a lot of screams from the coaches there saying, "Wait a minute, that's the wrong guy for you to cover, take and whatnot." I think people generally knew what their responsibility was coming off those plays, so that was good to see. Then they had another odd fumble drill. Now, this was a weird one because the defender is picking up the football. He tosses the football on the ground. Then he knocks presumably a tackler into a pit that is prepared for him so they won't have injuries. And then he goes after the football again. So has the ball, fumbles it away intentionally, knocks his teammate into a pit, and then runs after to get the ball again and cover it up. So in the NFL, as far as I know, every level of football, you're allowed to, once a ball is on the ground, use your hands. And there are no restrictions as there are with blocking in terms of not being able to hold or anything like that. You use your hold. You throw the guy 15 feet if you want. Can't be unnecessarily rough about it, but throw the player away in your effort to get the ball, and you're well within your rights on a football field. So they need to practice that a little bit. And this is just an interesting little drill to do that. A lot of fun, a lot of clowning around. So it's a good drill to kind of wind down those individual efforts. So at that point, the teams came together, and they did split up again for some 7-on-7 activity later, but they came together for the initial sessions of 11-on-11. A few things came out of this, and I'll talk about it. These are all defensive notes, nothing for the offense I've got right now. Ardarius Washington is seeing more time at ones in the nickel. So this is an interesting development because, they've had a couple different positions, left guard being one, where they've already announced that Saleh is going to be moving to the number 2s next week. They're going to be flipping Simpson up to the number 1s. We'll see how that plays out in the preseason game in terms of who gets to play with the 1s and 2s, or if they alternate, or what they might do. But it's interesting that they're switching. I would personally be of the belief, having seen the same kind of thing happen with CEOs. So you have two guys you think are too good, you can't lose either. And you say, I'll tell you what, the next 4 years, each of you is going to be CEO for 2 years. And the guy, you want to be second in that deal. You want to be the second and do things that play off of the first's weaknesses potentially. But anyway, demonstrate clearly that you're better. You also have an idea, of how much you're behind and how much you need to gamble in terms of making moves that'll pay off for you in that situation. So anyway, in this particular case, with Simpson and Saleh, I think it may mean that Simpson is back in a pretty good position to win the left guard job. Certainly not out of it at this point. Ben Cleveland's name is not getting mentioned in those same sentences. The platitudes that go with it are all about needs to be more consistent, needs to bring it every day, practice, needs to stack practices, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean anything in terms of when is his opportunity coming. He's been playing backup right guard and backup right tackle. And so he certainly will be on the team in terms of, won't be cut. But on the other hand, it's not obvious exactly where his opportunity is going to come, if indeed one comes due to injury. So that'll be something that we'll keep our eye on. And in the preseason, watching how Cleveland plays in what will probably be pretty significant amount of preseason snaps for him, because he's not going to get the starter treatment. He's not one of the big 4 linemen who are all set. And he's not even the left guard where they probably will split snaps for the first half or something, or into the second half. He could be a guy who plays 2 positions and plays 3/4 of the game. Wouldn't surprise me if that's the case, and that they really want to see a lot of Ben Cleveland to try and see, can he bring something from versatility, even if he's not going to be our starter somewhere? Could he be could he be a 3-position backup in terms of left guard, right guard, and right tackle potentially? So we'll look for what happens to Cleveland in those preseason games, but I think that's going to be one of the things. But I made this point originally because they're doing the same thing at slot corner, it appears. So they had Stevens back there at slot corner for a while. They had Mollett in there for a couple of days. Now Mollett missed practice today. And Ardarius Washington seeing ties with the ones. And he'd kind of been a forgotten guy so far, playing a lot of 2 and 3, second and third team snaps, and not getting a lot of total snaps, frankly. Well, today, not only did he see action, but he played really well. So he had a pass defense in addition to an interception we'll talk about later, that kind of began or was near the start of the avalanche of interceptions that occurred by the defense on this day. A couple more players I want to point out. Pepe Williams, obviously still in the hunt for that slot corner role, had a nice downhill play on Prochet for a 5-yard gain. And this is a thing, you make the most of your opportunities. He didn't have a ton of snaps today. He played a little bit of safety, but when he's in there at slot corner, he really needs to show the downhill physicality that would be one of the complaints about his game. I don't think there's any question that he has the downhill tenacity. It's more about having the physicality to really take care of larger men opposite him, whether that be running backs or receivers, and made a nice downhill play on Prochet to take him down, or what appeared to wrap him up quickly for about a 5-yard gain. I mentioned Tavius Robinson. He's getting lots of playing time with Ajabo out. So Ajabo's missed now several days, might be 4 in a row now, I believe he's missed. And he has just looked very good in terms of his pass rush. I don't think he's given up everything for it. I was having a little bit of discussion with Jonas Schaefer about this at practice, and Jonas thought he's been great. And one of the things he noticed was that he'd been containing the outside well, not just letting Lamar get away on the rush. And it was funny because just like 5 plays earlier, I had just the opposite thing written down in my book about a particular play where Tavius had gotten really good pressure, but he left the door open for Lamar to rush right on a play. And we just had a laugh about that. Obviously, it's small sample size, either direction we were going in this. But I think he's done a very good job in terms of his pass rush looking really good this year. So that's something that that I think has been very positive. Ravens are really going to need a third outside linebacker to step up and play some high-quality snaps. And if Tavius Robinson could be that guy, along with Owe and Ajabo taking the bulk of snaps total, that'll be a good thing. They also really need to find a Sam linebacker as well. Darryl Worley, another guy who looked pretty good. He was playing primarily safety. He's played a little bit, maybe a corner today, but he's basically been a safety. We've been over this a little bit, but Worley, a guy who came out of school at 4.64 in terms of his 40 time. Really, though he has the body of a cornerback in terms of his size and length and whatnot, just perfect for the position. He's a little bit too slow to play outside corner in today's game, and he's probably not a 4.64 guy anymore, we would have to think. So, safety seems like a reasonable move for him where his instincts play into it better. His length can still play into it in terms of being a hulking presence, and particularly if he's at strong safety, you can move him up into the box and do things with him that would make him a short zone defender. That is exceptionally difficult to deal with his size. So I think, a guy who will make the team. I don't think I guess there's always doubt about that in terms of the cornerback room, because he's a veteran who you're paying market price to, and you're not, you don't have further years of team control related to him, but I think he'll make the team. And he had a pass defense in this game, in addition to an interception that we'll talk about a little later. So he had another good practice. And I think to me, in the days I've been there, he has shown enough that I would be pretty excited to have him as one of the, or I would just say, I'd be excited. I would want him to be one of the 5 or 6 cornerbacks that were active for the Ravens on game day. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the 11-on-11 drills. We'll cover some other stuff first, then we'll get to the interceptions. Owe was part of a pressure that forced Lamar into a throwaway about 10 yards, 3 circle. Owe still getting some decent pressure, still in the backfield a fair amount of the time. We really need to see live fire to judge his get off and first move to see if progress has really been made with Chuck Smith, in my opinion. There's still not, it's not high intensity practice of the type you would see with pads and a live opponent. Even just with pads, they've had those practices so far. Those are still dialed back to 3 quarters, even though players want to show out when they have pads on. But then you have other practices where they don't have pads, and you're definitely getting some significant brother-in-law play. So we need more. We need, practices against the Commanders and those preseason games to begin before we know what we really have in terms of a change in Odafe Owe. The offense today, by my count, had 5 false starts separate. That is simply awful. They've been having, a couple per day, which is what I would call that a little bit too high, but maybe not absurdly too high. But 5 in one day is just awful. And the very first one of them kind of caught my eye. Roquan crept up to the line of scrimmage, and Linderbaum moved the ball, and then Linderbaum kind of gave Oweh a playful slap for kind of throwing him off. Well, that's of course Roquan for throwing him off, and of course that's Roquan's job is to do exactly that to opposing linemen, to disrupt their scheme, to make them wonder if he's coming or not, to maybe line up in the A gap sometimes and not have them not be sure how to assign their blocking from that point. So, don't blame Roquan for your problem is what I'd say about that one in Linderbaum's case. But it was all over the offensive line, various people having problems. It wasn't the center in every case. Broderick Washington had a nice downhill play to tackle Mitchell for a short gain. It's one of these plays where the cutback was completely under control and he was bottled up. So it's a really nice play from Broderick, and just like see him stacking plays. He's certainly part of the getting pressure up the middle. We want to see pressure from him. We want to see him continue to leap and deflect balls the way he did. But I'm also enjoying, his plays in pursuit, his plays as being a patient defender who waits for a screen pass, say, to develop, or a swing pass, and knows what to do, knows where to be. And I think we've seen good things from Broderick this year. And I hope I hope at some point, the Ravens look into what it would take to get him back for, extra 3 years, say, at this point. I think he'd be one of the really good targets among their fourth-year players. Of course, they do that with anyone. And this is one of the real catch-22s about this. You got, 7, 8 guys who are in their fourth year, want a new contract, whether it's Queen or Dobbins or Broderick or Matabike or, any of the guys. And then you really have to ask yourself, if we sign one, are we going to upset the others such that their performance might even be reduced this year? So even if they approach the Matabike and Washington situation as right player, right price. So look, we'll make an offer to each of you. This offer, obviously, in both cases is a little bit less than you'll earn if you make it to free agency and everything is cool and you have a pretty good year this year. You certainly would be expected to do better than this. But this is also reduces your risk because you could get hurt this year. And then you might be looking at a 1-year prove-it deal some year, be out of the league the next year potentially, and have your career really shortened. And this is an opportunity where each side should probably see the value in or the divisible benefit that's available on that table for both. Take the risk out of the game for the player, add money. Take some of the money away from the team's cap concerns, and you might really have an arrangement that can work. So anyway, how J.K. Dobbins would react to Broderick Washington being signed right now, I don't even want to think about. It's the kind of thing that would just really concern you. If Justin Matabike were the guy who got signed, I'd even be more concerned because it's more of the money off the table. In some ways, that's a good thing because if you think about it, it's a zero-sum game. The total salary cap is the total salary cap is available. The players have to split it in some way between them, or the team has to split it for the players by deciding how much they think each is worth. And so it's another data point to how the Ravens feel, and another point, even though it's within a much larger context, of how the NFL feels as a whole, that a player like Justin Matabike probably will get a significantly larger contract than J.K. Dobbins after this year. And it's the nature of the NFL. It's how these players relatively are valued. It's how analytics has come into this and looked at their relative contributions and finds out which, tries to assess which is more valuable. And frankly, it's how replaceable each of these guys is in terms of how far down do you drop from JK to the next available back. But maybe that's Keaton Mitchell, let's say, in terms of who would pick up those snaps from him. Or if it's Broderick Washington, you might be dropping off to somebody who's substantially further down the line. So you really have to think about, replaceability of that position. And it's just an unfortunate fact of life that running backs come from a very large size and shape pool, as I call it. So there's a lot to draw from there. There's a lot of great athletes who played running back in high school. It's obviously a position everybody wants to touch the football, right? If you can't be quarterback, you probably want to be a wide receiver or a running back. So It's a very common position that the average body types of the 5'10" to 6 feet, 180 to 215 range athletes play at. And, those guys are not left tackles. They are not tight ends. They are not a lot of things. But they are running backs. Some of them are even too big to play cornerback. Or too small in terms of their height to play cornerback, or not fast enough to play cornerback. And what it comes down to is that position. And I would say to a very similar extent, the inside linebacker position are very large size and shape pools that the players in that just have to deal with that fact. It's kind of like being a regular 6-foot guy and wanting to get in the NBA. They're just limited opportunities for you. So, it is what it is. Anyway, by the way, I want to recommend people listen to the show on running back contracts done with Mark Horton. Outstanding young man who brought a lot to this discussion in terms of running back contracts, where they're headed. I think there was a good back and forth in terms of how the players ought to view this, how the teams ought to view this, how each side could compromise. I think there's just a lot of good material in there. Highly recommend. It will be out tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Sunday, it should be out on Monday morning on Filmstudy. So please take a look at that. I would highly recommend that. It runs just over an hour, and it's a very good pod for my money. Let's get back to practice a little bit today. What else happened that we want to talk about? Prochet had a couple of nice catches early in the practice before the interceptions began. He had 2 straight catches, both from Josh Johnson. One was a 10-yard play by the left sideline. It was in front of Brandon Stevens. Nice way to take in the football. He kind of was cutting back for it in a way that was gaining space in the process, which is nice to see him be aware of that in terms of his route running. The other one was just a short throw right at the line of scrimmage between the numbers and left hash. So in that number 2 strip, as I'll call it. But he made a very nice juke at the line of scrimmage, and it looked as if it could have been a big play right there. He looks like he got into space, and that's something the Ravens probably will want to work on if they have the cap of the defense appropriately taken off. There ought to be more opportunities to make some hay in space. They got a lot of speed on this team now with Flowers and Duvernay and Keaton in particular, but also a player like Prochet who can be elusive in space, can work with some different concepts probably that we haven't seen much from the Ravens. I mentioned pick and rub routes. Just has not been a big part of the Ravens lexicon these last few years with Greg Roman. And I think for some obvious reasons, that's true. You can blame some of it on Roman if you want to. You can, blame some of it on the nature of the players that he wants to have in for a run heavy scheme and how he wants to present that to opposing defensive coordinators. But I think Monken is going to be more flexible in terms of using various body types at wide receiver. I don't think you have to be big and tall necessarily. I think that he'll find ways to use fast guys. I think he'll find ways to use tight ends. I think he'll find ways to take the top off the defense. I think he'll find ways to gadgetize his various players who fit that role well. Prochet, Keaton, Mitchell, Flowers, and of course Duvernay all fit into that category. So he's got some good toys to work with, and it'll be a lot of fun to see how this plays out. Mason, another difficult day as a catcher. Now, he did catch a nice wheel route up the left side for 20 plus yards. And then later, little flat route, drops the football. You just cannot have that continue to happen from a fullback who's going to catch a fair number of passes there, already is dealing with a fairly miserable yard per target result to start with. Well, every target you drop, of course, is going to make that even worse. And so he's dropped a lot of balls. He's had some problems fumbling the ball after it's been in there. And it's something that I'm not sure exactly where he fits in. And the question that kind of enters my mind as practice is ending is, well, what if Ricard can't go? Is it possible the Ravens will start with 3 tight ends, try and use Likely or Kolar as a pseudo fullback or just a lineup in the backfield option for some package of plays, and not go all that heavy too often. But do they have to find another option at fullback other than Mason? Because honestly, he has not looked good at all as a receiver. And once you're there, it becomes much harder to justify some of the other things he's doing as a blocker. So he better be a great blocker if he's going to be as bad a receiver as he's been. And I don't think we've seen him be in any Patrick Ricard. Now, we get an opportunity to let Mason show out in these preseason games and in these practices against the Commanders to try and see if in a much more physical environment how his blocking looks. And he's definitely one of the players in this preseason you want to keep an eye on. Jackson made a nice throw to Andrews, 15 yards between the numbers and the right hash. So it's in that 4 slot. Hit him in stride. Looked like it would have been a big play. It's the kind of thing crossing and being able to outrace a defender who is trailing is a Andrews big play special and something that we hope we see a lot of this season. I do think we're probably seeing a little more of Jackson at Andrews' favorite targetism showing up in this camp so far, but he moved those interceptions around a little bit as we're gonna talk about. Okay, 9 interceptions. Let's go through them real quickly. Mayfield had a leaping 25-yard interception deep down the left sideline in front of Bridges. Washington had a 35-yard interception on the right boundary in front of Tariq Black. Worley had a 15-yard interception. I couldn't even tell you who it was intended for, but it was between the numbers and the right hash. He's playing safety at the time, so that's a good one. Mayfield scores his second interception of the day, 35 yards down the left sideline. That was from Josh Johnson. We had a strange tipped ball situation where Welch tipped the ball, then Jaquan Amos tipped it, and then it was finally secured by Jeremy Lucien. Really good to see the defense getting a tip drill to work like that. And, they're not doing a tip drill as a drill. They're doing a tip drill in live fire. So that's good. I actually think that might've been a 7-on-7 play. It's really bad to get an interception on 7-7. It's also really bad to get a ball tipped twice in 7-on-7. So this was quite awful. And Lucien came up with a pick. Hamilton interception, Jackson, 15 yards between the hashes. Right after the play, Lamar Jackson rolled to the ground in personal disgust, as I would read it. He's just obviously upset with not having a good day. And, it's kind of like, oh my God, what's happening here? And that's how I read it anyway. And obviously the offense didn't have a good day. The next play, not the next play, but the next interception was Marcus Williams, who picked off Jackson 15 yards right in the middle of the field. Same spot on the field as Hamilton. And in a lot of ways it looked the same, but Marcus Williams looked like his early season per play brilliance that he put on, his per snap brilliance that really had him in position to maybe be a defensive player of the year candidate early in the season before he got hurt. And he looked great there. And then it was 2 to 4 plays later. I couldn't tell you the exact number, but he intercepted Jackson again, this time 20 yards down that strip between the left numbers and the left hash. So 2 quick interceptions there for Marcus Williams, and he looks like the ball hawking stud of old. That at least is very positive. And sometimes you look at these as a zero-sum game, and we talked about the pass rush versus the offensive line on a previous episode. This is more a case, obviously, of the quarterbacks versus the defensive backs and their reads they're getting here. And I think that it could still be a zero-sum game, but it's really nice to see Marcus Williams playing at that kind of an all-pro level that we would hope for him in a season after he played so well on a per-snap basis for the Ravens when he was in there. Anyway, the last interception of the day was Kayvon Seymour, interception of Josh Johnson, 35 yards down the right sideline. So a lot of long balls, a lot of kind of flotation devices, which hung up a little too long and got picked off. All underneath guys. It wasn't over the top guys with these interceptions. It wasn't a lot of lurking, in the Ed Reed style with a loose bracket, trying to find those, tip balls and overthrown balls. They did have one tip, but most of it was interceptions by the underneath player, just making a good play here. And unfortunately, a lot of that's got to fall back to the quarterback really underthrowing the football in a way that's not very good. Anyway, practice today. They sometimes keep score. Had they done that, I don't think it would have been anything the offense would want to remember. It was a simple, brutal, unfair massacre, and the defense had its way pretty much all day with the offense. Uh, it is a day that grants you perhaps some hope that the Ravens' cornerback problems are not as bad as they seem to be currently, with the injury to Rock Ya-Sin and the release of Mullen and the uncertain status, I guess, of exactly how it's going to be resolved. But Mullen is probably never going to play for the Ravens. Would be my take on the current situation. And who do they have left? Well, maybe Corey Mayfield. Maybe he's a guy who has found himself a more significant role, perhaps on the outside at corner for this team, just based on what's happening. Maybe we're seeing something where the slot corners, and in particular, Ardarius Washington, could have a role on this team that would be more than we had expected. I think that going into this practice and seeing him have a fairly limited role, my feeling would have been Washington would have been going to the practice squad. Now I'm not so sure anymore. I think this was a really big day for him, and he's one of the players now I really want to look at in preseason. I want to see how he shows out, and maybe he's got a role somewhere among 6 defensive backs now with some of the obvious non-success, some of the injuries, some of the other things that are going on in that cornerback room that just do not look good at all. So hopefully, anyway, there's some players here who are poised to pounce on the opportunity and make a contribution. Real quickly, talk about the interviews briefly. We had George Godsey, the tight ends coach. Nice guy. I'd never heard him speak before. Did a good job at the podium. Doesn't ever come up there with any precursor remarks. Usually the offensive defensive coordinators do that, and so does the head coach. They talk about, good day of practice, nice warm day, blah, 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 really physical. I like the way the guys took care of each other. All typical Harbaugh comments from a post-practice preamble. And then he starts to take questions. Well, guys, he just goes up and, no bones about it. Let's just go to questions right away. There were some good ones, I thought, in this one. He talked about the tight ends needing to be ready with versatility that keeps the opposing defensive coordinator guessing. That second part I am putting in there as or extrapolating from the words he actually used. But I thought that was a very good point, is that this team, they have blocking guys. They have some missing blocking guys from last year. They don't really probably have a complete handle on the breakdown of snaps they're going to be asked to do in terms of blocking assignments and pass catching assignments, and who's going to be, are they going to have a lot of 12? Are they going to have any 13 this year after what's happened before? But he did say that Monken had been good with tight ends before, and he thought that it still worked out well for the tight ends here. He talked about Isaiah Likely a little bit as a guy who takes good notes and has good questions. That's always really good to hear, because we don't really ever get to see in that the schoolroom, that they're in, the position rooms, and how they're going over their assignments and what they have to do. So about the closest we get to the tight ends room is watching Siragusa lock the tight ends in the trailer and then run away and Siragusa, right? Locking and Shannon Sharp in the trailer in Hard Knocks, but we don't get to see inside very often. He talked a little bit about Travis Vokolek, who's that fourth tight end, comes out of Nebraska. If there's not an injury in the preseason, if the Ravens' depth holds up, I would be fairly certain Vokolek is a guy they'll try and keep on the practice squad. First of all, they usually want a tight end there, but he's just seen a lot of play in terms of the third team offense looks. So hasn't been on the field for that many plays. I'd say his target share has been darn good for when he's been on. He's a really big dude, so it can probably help you as a blocker. And he certainly, being a rookie, is a guy the Ravens want to try and keep around the building if they can. And obviously, if they practice putting him on the practice squad, they'd be taking a chance on losing him. But I think they'd like to, all things being equal, keep him around so he's available if someone gets hurt, and also so that he's a guy who might grow into a 1 of 3 or 1 of 4 role next year. If the need arises, if for any reason Likely or Kolar was lost for an extended period, say for next year, you want to have a guy who's cheap still on his rookie deal around that can that can help you in multiple ways, whether receiver, blocker, whatever that might be, maybe even lining up in the backfield. So Vokalek, I think, has looked pretty good. And he was a guy who was on the draft list. I didn't really have him as a draftable player, but now that the Ravens have got him, I kind of like what they have here, and he's he looks like a guy who could potentially help the Ravens. Might be a guy who comes up for a practice squad activation if one of the tight ends, for example, can't go for a game or two. Charlie Kolar was the next guy out there. Talked about having added some good weight in the offseason. He wants to play at about 265. It's about 10 pounds heavier than he played as a rookie. He talked about his love of cheeseburgers, which was kind of funny. He's definitely a tries to be funny guy. Let's put it that way. So he's you can tell there's kind of a comic thing. Andrews walked by as the interview was going on and was trying to disrupt him by making funny faces at him or maybe making a noise. And, Charlie and him clearly, are friendly, and he told him to shut up, and that was actually kind of amusing to us. Anyway, that's it's on, I'm sure, the live stream of the interviews if you want to go take a listen to it. But he said that one of the things in college was that he played a little bit fat, and even though he was carrying some additional weight, it wasn't good weight, and he'd made an effort to improve the weight he's carrying to make it be more muscle. And of course, you always like to hear that along with any kind of position specific training the player's doing during the off season. In terms of position specific training, Isaiah Likely came to the podium next, and he spent time at tight end U this offseason. So great to hear that, by the way. You want to hear a player take time, improve his body, and like Kolar, and then you want to hear a guy who really goes out and tries to figure out what he's doing at his position, what could be better, what could be, what didn't work, and I need to improve on. So a lot of different approaches he mentioned, and a lot of different tight ends across the league and how they do things, and he thought he derived value from that. Added about 5 pounds during the offseason, and he was the one who finally pointed out that you can't judge the offense completely based on all these 3rd and long drills, but it didn't look very good. I'm going to say 9 interceptions. If it should have been 7, but because it was 3rd and long, that's still an awful lot, and probably way too many for the circumstances, regardless. So the other thing, point Likely made, is that when he doesn't think of it as losing, he thinks of it as learning. Obvious, a very positive point, and one of the great ways to turn the interview question away from the negative quickly. What's your weakness, son? Chocolates. Well, that's what people tell you to say on an interview, and this is kind of a response like that. So when we're losing, we're learning, and it's certainly something that you want to take to heart. Anyway, that's it for Camp Notes on August 5th. Always great to be able to do these shows with folks. Looking for people still to be on Film Study Shorts. If you'd like to be on one, hit me up. There's going to be opportunities before the season starts. And if you DM me on Twitter, I promise I'll get back to you very quickly. And we'll talk about any idea you might have for an episode, whether it might be a GM idea, some particular analytics idea, or the kind of idea that Mark Horton just had in talking about running back contracts and how the current situation does not have an easy resolution to it. So there's a lot there, and I hope you'll take a listen to that episode. And don't feel like you need to have some highly intellectual argument. You will hear that from Mark, but I'll discuss generally with people what they think about the Baltimore Ravens. Think of me more as a call-in guy for a radio station. You always have a chance anyway to call in. And I'm really looking also for people who might do well on a show during the regular season. Might be somebody who wants to talk about a particular issue or an acquisition when it comes up. So I'm always looking to meet new people. Please take advantage of that. And I'd love to hear from you and get back to you quickly when I do. Anyway, we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.